What up, y'all? It's Dev, Mtg. We like it a magic. Hope your Wednesday was good, and I hope your Thursday is going to be even better. But it doesn't get much better. Some of these previews we saw for the Brothers War yesterday. Crazy amount of really good stuff. So we really don't have much time. We got to start getting to it. Let's go. Now, today was so nuts to butts that we barely got any commons to look at. But even the ones that we did get were pretty decent. We got Power Stone Engineer and Goblin Blast Runner. Engineer is just 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/1 Human Artificer. And when it dies, you create a tapped Power Stone token. It's not quite Riveteer's Requisitioner, and that card is kind of nice. I like to play it every now and again, but it's still a nice little dude. 2 mana, get a little bit of situational ramp when it dies. Not an embarrassing stat line. Like, sometimes I'll take this, and in limited, I think it's like especially good. But we'll go ahead and move on to this other little common right here. Goblin Blast Runner. GBR is just 1 red mana for a 1/2 Gobbo, and it gets +2/+0 and has menace as long as you sacrificed a permanent this turn. So that includes treasure tokens, blood tokens, clue tokens, pretty much anything that you could possibly imagine. Basically, it's amazing that this doesn't say like non-token permanent or something. Just 1 mana for kind of a 3/2 menace on a whole lot of turns is really, really good. You know, it's going to be kind of difficult to get it to swing for 3 on turn 2 some of the time, but starting on turn 3, turn 4, it shouldn't be too hard to make this work for you. Right now, Mono Red Aggro doesn't have a whole lot of places for this because it's not really sacrificing dudes on turn 2 or 3, or even treasures for that matter. So I'm not sure it goes in that deck, but maybe the Oni Cold Anvil deck or some other kind of like sacrifice thing or something else with a lot of treasure tokens. I can see this actually being a pretty decent little 1-drop. Now, we did get kind of a lot of today, not going to lie to you, it was uncommons. There's like 12 of these things I want to look at, but I'm going to kind of fly through them, but still take some time because, you know, since like Kamigawa, but really before then, just uncommons have been like super official. We're seeing a pretty high power level at the uncommon slot, and this set's no exception. Now, I want to take a quick look at Static Net here. I felt like this was just barely worth including. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for an enchantment. When it ETBs, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until net leaves the battlefield. But when it ETBs, you also gain 2 life and you get a tap Power Stone token. So kind of a lot of things this little 4 mana enchantment does. And we keep seeing like takes on Fate's Fetters in the last couple of sets. But even though this one doesn't have flash, like one of them that we just saw, I will say 2 life and a little bit of, again, situational ramp. But I'm just going to start calling it ramp from now on. 2 life and some ramp and a removal spell. Like, yeah, it's actually just enough to make me consider playing it, but you know, 4 mana is kind of a lot for this effect nowadays. But up next, let's take a look at Krim, the Argivian Avenger here. Wrong channel, right? But anyway, this is 6 mana for a 5/5 artifact creature. It's a shapeshifter. And you can pay 1. Until end of turn, Avenger gets -1/-1, gains your choice of flying, vigilance, death touch, or haste. I actually think this is really, really cool. 7 mana for a 4/4 haste isn't the best thing in the world, but in limited, I think this is probably worth playing a good bit of the time, especially considering you can play it with Power Stone tokens or whatever, and you can activate its ability with Power Stone tokens. So maybe it's easier to give this thing haste and other abilities than I think it is. Right? But the fact that, like, you know, flying, vigilance, death touch, haste, those are all really, really good keyword abilities. So I'm not sure how often you're going to give it death touch if it's already a 5/5, but most of these abilities are good, and death touch could even be good in a few situations. So I don't know, man. I kind of like it. I'm not saying throw it into your standard decks, probably not there, but in limited, I think this is a nice little thing that's probably going to win you a game or two time to time. Just the last thing on this card, because I struggled with even including it today, but I do want to say, I know it might not look super impressive to every player out there, even in limited, but just picture how much of a headache this thing really is to swing into or try to block. It looks kind of tough to me, but we'll move on to Transmogrifier Altar next. Now, this is a take on a card that I love very, very much, but they kind of made it not so great. We'll talk about it in a second. Let's read the card. This is a 3 mana artifact that you can pay a black and tap it and sacrifice a creature to add 3 colorless mana. Or you can pay 2 and tap it and sack a creature to make a 3/3 zombie artifact creature token, but you can only do this as a sorcery. So only do it as a sorcery on the second ability, which is a little bit lame, but also the fact that you not only have to tap it for the mana production ability, but you also have to pay mana to use the mana production ability. It's just like, it's all kind of whack, to be honest. It's not Ashnod's Altar. I guess they're trying to make like a safe version of Ashnod's Altar, and yeah, you hit it, Chief. You did it. I don't know how much safer you could have made this. It's still kind of a cool card. I mean, it's mana generation. It's for aristocrats decks to make mana when they sacrifice dudes, but And it achieves that purpose, but maybe I'm just too, like, disappointed in how much they neutered the source material to really get behind the card right now. But we'll be trying it in standard. You know, Aristocrats decks need mana, especially right now. I keep seeing Aristocrats decks that, you know, at least I keep conceptualized thinking about Aristocrats decks that, you know, aren't just your typical 1 and 2 mana guys, just a bunch of dorks that you throw onto the table as quickly as you can. There's actually a bunch of Aristocrats cards that deck wants to play that cost like 7 mana. It's like 5-6 mana cards that deck wants. And this will help you get there. So I don't hate this card, but I do. It's not, boy, is it not Ashnod's Altar. But at the end of the day, that's probably for the best. Let's stop off and look at Gurgling Anointer next. This isn't a translation of like a foreign card. They just named the card Gurgling Anointer. Something about it just, I don't know. I don't like it. But 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 1/3 Phyrexian Horror with flying. And whenever you draw your second card each turn, it's one of these. It gets a +1/+1 counter. Whenever it dies, you return another target creature card with mana value less than or equal to the Anointer's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, again, limited playable, very likely. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but, you know, maybe after a couple of turns, when it gets to like 3 power, it starts actually being able to do cool stuff. Perhaps. Could be, and like it's a flyer, so when it gets to like a 3 or 4 power flyer, your opponent has to deal with it because it's actually like a real threat. When your opponent does deal with it, then it brings something else back. So maybe it brings back another Anointer, you start over. It's probably not good. Just throw that out there. But maybe in limited, that's where you want to be with this. But you know, there's just something about it. Its name, again, I do not like its name, but the text box on it, you know, I want to work with it. Let's check out Skyfisher Spider next. This is like covertly one of my favorite cards of the day. This is, I guess it's not too covert if I just tell you. This is 4 mana, 2, a green, and a black for a 3/3 spider with reach. And when it ETBs, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, destroy target non-land permanent. Let's go. When Skyfisher Spider dies, you may gain 1 life for each creature card in your graveyard. If you do, exile Spider from your yard. So just a sweet little package here. I mean, it's just Hill Giant stats, which isn't good, and you do have to sacrifice a guy, which is also not super good. I'm not totally enamored with this. It's not Necrotal or Ravenous Chupacabra or even Gelatinous Cube. It's probably better than Cube. I really wanted Cube to be a good card, but it just never really was. This, at least they can't like kill the guy and they get their thing back or whatever. No, I mean, their thing is gone forever, and it's a non-land permanent. I mean, if you want a reason why I think this might be better in a lot of cases than Necrotal or something like, ooh, that's non-land permanent. It's like a Binding the Old Gods you got to sacrifice a guy to. You can turn that into an upside pretty quick. And, you know, these green-black self-mill decks that I keep bringing up this season, they want creatures that are also spells. You know, they especially need removal spells. And they were actually at a distinct lack when Gelatinous Cube left the format. They were a distinct lack for creatures that are also removal spells. This puts a creature in your yard and is a removal spell. Like, come on, man. When it dies, you gain like 5 life in that deck at least. So, I don't know, man. I really like this thing, even outside of the self-mill decks and just like a regular old Golgari deck that has access to tokens to sack or whatever. Like, who cares? Like, this thing actually looks really solid to me. Unlike a lot of spiders that we see coming into standard over the last few years, this card might actually have legs. Moving on to Levitating Statue, though. This is 2 mana for an artifact, and it just has flying. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can put a +1/+1 counter on the Levitating Statue. And you can also pay 2 to have it become a 1/1 artifact construct creature till end of turn. So, neat, I guess. Again, like maybe this is limited playable, but I like things in standard. But the problem is this is basically like a do-nothing. But it is kind of like wrath proof in those, you know, blue-red or blue-X or whatever, kind of tempo decks. But again, those decks are tempo-based, and this really, you sacrifice a lot of tempo to play this card on too. But it is, you know, kind of sweeper-proof. It's sorcery speed removal-proof and stuff. So I sort of like this after just a couple of turns of casting spells. It's going to be like a 4/4 flyer, like probably faster than you think. You know, 3 spells and it's a 4/4 flyer. Let's go, kind of. So, I don't know. I like this. I think that it might cost a little bit too much mana to activate and then still be able to not only develop your board state, but also have the mana to play things like Shore Up and other spells that you need to cast on your turn. To you know, have all the mana that you need in your tempo deck to activate this and do all the other things you need might be a little difficult. So might be off the mark on that, but you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see a deck or two here or there playing a copy or two of this, but it's somewhat doubtful. That said, cool uncommon for like spells decks and limited. Those always have to exist, and this is a good card for those. Let's check out Hero of the Dunes next, y'all. This is a pretty slick little card. 5 mana. Kind of a lot, but well, let's keep reading. 3 in Orzhov colors, white and black, for a 3/2 human soldier. And when it ETBs, return target artifact or creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And also, just by the way, creatures you control with mana value 3 or less get +1/+0. So here we come. Let's do it. For mana value 3 or less, tribal, I guess. There's a lot of decks are sort of already doing that. There's so many good like 3-drops in standard over the last couple of years. So neat little thing. I'm not really sure this sees all the play. I'm really not. I mean, 5 mana is kind of a lot, but for 5 mana, you can probably get, I mean, what are you getting really in terms of mana value? Because you're getting 3 mana value out of your graveyard, right? So you might make the argument that this card is not worth 5 mana, but I mean, you're kind of getting 3 of that mana back immediately, and you're getting a body on the table, and the body does other stuff too. I mean, +1/+0 is nothing to sneeze at. It's not the best thing ever, but it's something. So I don't hate this. I think like flickering it is really, really sweet, obviously, right? So maybe sometimes you reanimate this with some kind of reanimation effect, and then can bring back something else. I just, you know, I kind of like it. I like the idea of bringing like Hero of the Dunes back, and then you get back Extraction Specialist, and that gets something else back. It's just, I don't know, sweet kind of thing. Also, by the way, don't overlook, I should say, that this can get back artifacts as well. I bet there's a lot of fun tricks with that in Commander and even Standard. Let's check out Bushwhack next. It's a great name for a card. It's just a green mana for a sorcery. It's modal. Choose one of these. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle that thing up, or target creature you control fights a creature you don't control. So it's Lay of the Land or Prey Upon, but it's the same card. That's actually really good, man. Again, limited, yeah, I think you'll play every copy of this that you get, but even in Standard, like, this might have some amount of a chance, you know? Like, if it's not a fight spell, or if you don't have any creatures, if your opponent doesn't have any creatures, go get a land drop, you know? Like, it could be worse. I'm not sure that it quite makes the mark, but this is basically the best, like, Prey Upon that they printed, if not ever, then in a very long time, so... Card is sweet. Yeah, I know it's not Blizzard Brawl. I know it's not Blizzard Brawl, but still, you know, nothing can be as annoying as that card. That was the best Prey Upon ever. But still, you know, the fact to just turn it into a Lay of the Land, cash it in for a basic land when it's not good as a fight spell, like, I'll take that. Versatility is king in a lot of games. Also, don't you kind of want to be able to say, I'll Bushwhack, you know, cast it. I'll Bushwhack that. Yeah, it's just something about it I like. But let's move on to Haywire Mite. Mite is just a single mana of any color for a 1/1 artifact creature who is also an insect, and when it dies, you gain 2 life. You can also pay a green and sack it to exile target non-creature artifact or non-creature enchantment. I don't know if this is going to be enough to stop a format full of wedding announcements and Fable of the Mirror Breakers and all kinds of other nasty artifacts and enchantments that aren't creatures, but it just might. It's not a bad card at all, you know. It's just, you get 2 life too, and in the meantime it's a creature. You can pay any mana for it. You have to have green to sack it, but easy enough to get on the table with like Pain Land mana on turn 1, and then it really makes your opponent think twice about playing that Fable of the Mirror Breaker, you know. So I actually think this is a really, really, really sweet card. It might actually be better than just sideboard play. I think this might be best of 1 playable depending on the kind of deck that you're playing, but one way or the other, it's definitely a great sideboard option for Standard players. Card's going to see some play. And that is not a Mite. That's a guarantee right there. But let's look at Giant Slagmaw next. Old pumpkin chest here. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 4/3 dinosaur beast. Would you look at that? With trample, and players can't gain life, so it's back. Rampaging Ferocidon is back from the dead, and I don't think it's going to get banned in Standard this time, you know? This is just a super jacked uncommon. They could have made it rare, but if I remember, when Rampaging Ferocidon was first spoiled, people were like, why is this rare? It's because it's good. This, I can't say is like strictly better or anything, but it's still, you know, decent stats for the mana cost, and they throw trample on there, and players can't gain life is actually going to be pretty impactful in more games than you might think. So I wish that I had some thoughtful analysis on this, but it's just a ridiculous red 3-drop. It's going in aggro decks forever. It's probably even going in a mid-range deck here or there. And I mean, it's pretty obvious to see why. Card is jacked on stats, card is jacked on keyword, card is jacked on actual text. That's neither of those things. So yeah, gonna see some play this one. Hello, sorry that all those uncommons took forever, but you know, there's uncommons that are like rare level, and then there are rares that are uncommon level, but there really weren't a whole lot of those today. That said, gotta start somewhere. So let's take a look at Autonomous Assembler here. This is 5 mana for a 4/5 assembly worker, and it's got vigilance. You can also pay 1 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target assembly worker you control. It's an assembly worker. Would you look at that? You can also prototype this in for just 2 mana, and it's a 2/2. 1 on a white, 2/2, kind of fair. Right, and then it can start putting +1/+1 counters on itself the next turn. But then you only have 2 mana to spend. It's just, I'm not too enamored with this thing, honestly. And there were so many really good rares and mythics and stuff today. I'd like to go ahead and get to them. I think this is probably fine in limited, especially if you draft up the assembly worker deck and you happen to get this as a rare. Like, maybe give it a shot, but I'm not sure how great this is outside of that format. Let's move to Skystrike Officer next. This is a neat looking card. 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/3 human soldier with flying. And when it attacks, you create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. And also, just because, tap 3 untapped soldiers you control to draw a card. So it's not Crypt Breaker or anything. Crypt Breaker was just a 1 mana. But do remember how often, we didn't think it was going to happen that often, but how often the Crypt Breaker, tap 3 zombies, draw a card ability popped off. A lot. So many times. But, again, Crypt Breaker is aided by being a 1-drop with value in the mid and late game. A 1-drop that gets you more cards. That's ridiculous. A 3-drop that gets you more cards. Well, we got plenty of those in Standard. It's just the best one of them. The Soldier deck is shaping up to look like it really wants to include blue in it. It does. And this card, I know some of you are going to be like, Dev, man, this is a 3 mana 2/3 flyer that makes more guys and draw cards. Like, what, you got a problem with this thing? Yeah. In some ways, I do. I don't think that a 3 mana 2/3 is a great stat line in Standard right now. Even though it does fly, it's not great against the vast majority of the flying creatures in Standard, especially where it is on curve. You might never draw a card to it, and it might never get a good attack in. And if it does have to, swing in and attack knowing it's going to die, then just getting a 1/1 token isn't that great. Card does snowball super effectively. If you get in 2 attacks with it cleanly, suddenly it's made 2 guys. That's enough on board to tap to draw cards, right? So making dudes that work towards its draw card ability, all this looks really good, and it especially looks like the kind of card that would go really well unchallenged and limited. I'm probably going to pick up a copy for my cube. I do like this card a lot, but I do have some reservations about Standard playability, even though the card obviously looks like pretty juiced. Let's move on, though, to Over the Top. It certainly is. The French name appears to be Exaggeration, and the card 100% is. This is 5 and 2 red for sorcery. Each player reveals cards from the top of their library equal to the number of non-land permanents they control. And then they put all the permanents revealed this way onto the battlefield. And then you put the rest in each player's graveyard, which I think is being overlooked here in terms of modes on this card, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. I will say, man, if you can guarantee that you have a bunch of things on the table, whether it's treasure tokens or 1/1 tokens or whatever, then maybe this is worth taking a look at. You do have to spend some of that treasure to help cast this. Power Stone tokens don't help cast it. That's kind of lame. So if you ramp into it, chances are you don't have as many non-land permanents because you're not as many turns into the game. Is this win more? Almost certainly. Do you probably not want to play this in your deck? Imagine getting this in your opening hand and having to play towards it. Nah, I don't think this card is actually good, especially considering it's symmetrical. Your opponent gets to do it too. All of that's kind of booty, but we are going to play a game with this card on stream. I can guarantee you that. The card is just absolutely bananas, and those are the kind of Magic cards I want to try. Let's check out one of the newer rares of the day. This is Teething Wormlet. This is 1 green mana for a 1/1 worm, and it has Death Touch. As long as you control 3 or more artifacts, they snuck a Metalcraft ability into the set. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. If this is the first time this ability is resolved this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Teething Wormlet. Cool little dude, man. It kind of, in the artifact deck, that is shaping up to be a lot more green than I initially thought it was going to be. I mean, you almost certainly want to play this card. In that deck, it kind of actually looks like a worse Generous Visitor for a lot of intents and purposes. Sorry, guys. but that's it. It still gets big as turns go on. It only gets a little bit bigger as turns go on, but it does. So that's kind of cool. Opponent eventually has to deal with it. And again, it's the kind of one drop that, it's not completely dead on like turn 4 or 5, by then it might be a 4/4. So I'll take that. I typically, again, I enjoy one drops like this. I like playing them in my Magic decks. I also like the fact that it's kind of like a Soul Warden or something like that, but for artifacts. And Commander players are going to eat that up. That's going to be a delicious breakfast right there. But even Standard players and beyond, Pioneer, Historic, or whatever, I think I'm going to try to slip this into a deck or two here and there. Just the life gain ability is like kind of relevant enough, especially in like aggro matchups and stuff. If you want to race or whatever, just get to the point in the game where you can turn the corner. The life gain ability might actually be really good. Note that the life gain ability triggers on everything, tokens included, and it triggers multiple times a turn. Just the +1/+1 ability only triggers once a turn. So this can actually like pretty heavily contribute to your life total over the course of the game and get big enough to where your opponent can't just ignore it anymore. So just a very sweet looking card to me. I guess the only thing negative that I have to say about it is that it kind of sounds like a Tolkien-esque insult of some kind. You teething wormlet, you. But I guess that's fun to say, so no harm, no foul. Let's move on to my favorite rare of the day. Probably not the best rare of the day, but nostalgia is a powerful thing some of the time. So let's take a look at a shade, everybody. It's Misery Shadow, just 1 and a black for a 2/2 shade. And if a creature an opponent controls would die, you exile that thing. Get it out of here instead. And you can also pay 1 mana to have Shadow get +1/+1 until end of turn. Okay, so here's the skizzy on this one. I'm not going to tell you this card's going to see all the play in the world. I'm just not sure that this is good anymore. I mean, you want to play something on curve on turn 3. You probably want to play a 4-drop on 4. And then at that point, maybe this card starts getting a little bit scary, the activated ability on it. But, I've been playing so much like Frozen Shade and Carrion Ants in the cube and stuff. And I just really miss those cards being good. They're still good in the cube. This is a pretty powered down cube. But still, these cards haven't been great since Nantuko Shade, like forever ago. And I got a lot of love for Nantuko Shade as well. So I'm just really happy to just see this card existing in the first place. And even though it's just a 2-mana 2/2 for the first couple of turns, it's on the board. And that's ideally, I guess you could play a 2-drop and swing for 3 on turn 2. But I think you'd really rather just play a 3-drop in most situations. But still, even if it takes a couple of turns to start actually carrion antsing, fire breathing the thing, then, still it's got a nice little passive ability on it. You'd be surprised how often this is incredibly relevant, the exile thing. So I don't know. I kind of like this little package. It's kind of like getting a Kumano Faces Kakazan 2/2 that can pump itself. But you don't get a bunch of other stuff, and it costs twice as much mana. So that's, again, bad comparison, but I think it's still like a sweet little card. And I really miss, like, black creatures with fire breathing. I don't know what we call that, but it's still like a cool ability that black cards, black creatures used to have. We just don't see much of. And obviously you can use, Power Stones to use this thing's ability. That's going to be important in draft. In Limited, this is a sick card. That's one of the reasons it's rare, by the way. But it's also rare because of old people like me who remember how good Nantuko Shade used to be. Pating! But it's not. It's probably not as good as it was back in the day, but it's still a slick little card. Let's take a look at something just solid-bodied right here. This is Rootwire Amalgam. It costs 5 mana, and it's a 5/5. Now, you can pay 3 and 2 green and sacrifice it to create an XX colorless Golem artifact creature token, and here X is 3 times Rootwire Amalgam's power. It gains haste until end of turn. You can only activate this as a sorcery. Now, you can also prototype this in for 1 and a green, and it's a 2/3. So just a 2-mana 2/3 that you can sack to get a 6 power haste guy. Probably these. And then, again, what is it? 5 mana 5/5. You can sack to get a 15 haste. The tokens don't have trample, which is a bother. It's a bit of a bother. I'd like them to have trample for the card to be really good, but I get the feeling that they had trample at some point in design, and it was really ridiculous, so I'm not too sure. You know, a 2-mana 2/3 isn't all it's cracked up to be, and you can only use the ability at sorcery speed, so if your opponent targets it with removal, it's not like you can just, like, sack it in response, and even if you could, it would cost 5 mana, which is a lot more than it looks like to some people. I keep seeing people say this card is nuts today. And I'm not too sure, but one thing I do know is the card is solid. Sometimes that's all a card has to be, you know, in mid-range decks. This is just a 2-mana 2/3 that will sometimes become a 6/6 later on. And if you don't get it on turn 2, or if you got better 2-drops to play, 5 mana, why not? 5 mana 5/5 that becomes a 15/15. So, I mean, all those modes, effectively, are pretty good. But are they better than some of the things in a mid-range deck that wants to play this card would already have access to in Standard? I don't know. Kind of depends on what you're doing. Are you getting extra power out of this being an artifact creature? Are you getting extra power out of the artifact creature coming into play, you know, once you get the token? You know, so there's probably ways to juice this in Standard, but at the same time, I'm not sure this sees all the play in the world because it's just kind of normal, just kind of a normal looking, strong, nonetheless strong, but still normal looking kind of card. But the flexibility, again, might be the key to making this card Standard playable. All that said, though, I get the distinct feeling that this is, most of the time, just a vanilla 2/3 for 2 mana. That's not very good. It just kind of isn't. So we'll move on to Myrel. Oh, Myrel. The Shield of Argive here. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 3/4 legendary human soldier during your turn. Opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of stuff, artifact, creatures, or enchantments. Whenever Myrel Shield of Argive attacks, create X 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you control. Oh my goodness, the card is actually okay. The stat line isn't everywhere you want it to be. You know, you want the card to attack, but for 4 mana, you kind of want it to be bigger than a 3/4. You know, it's not. It could be better, but 3/4 isn't the worst thing in the world. I'll say that. And what you really care about here in a lot of situations, I think, is going to be that first line of text on the card, especially if you're a commander player. This is another one where I assume a commander player is going to be like, oh, players can't do anything when I'm trying to do my stuff. Okay, let's play this card. This is my commander now. Honestly, it might be. It's actually a pretty sick commander. But, you know, when it comes to Standard play, is it playable in soldiers? This is going to sound weird. Sideboard card. Possibly, you know. In games, that first line of text is better against almost every deck of magical cards than you think it is. You know, it's not only for playing against control decks. It really isn't. I'm talking myself out of my own position here, but I do think this probably works more as a sideboard card in matchups where you're worried about your opponent doing dirty stuff to you on your turn. So there's that, or maybe they have a specific card you don't want them activating during your turn. There's that. But for what it's worth, I think that deck actually has better ways to use its slots. I don't know if it even wants to play 4-drops, and if it does, there might be better options in the main deck than this card. But, you know, that second line of text, the one I haven't even talked about yet, is probably really very good when you do attack with it. And there's going to be times, I think, where it's probably worth attacking in with this and just creating the tokens. Even if you know this is going to die, you make the tokens, you got a Valiant Veteran out, you just made like 6 power, you know, maybe more. So, and of course, if it's on the board by itself, it still makes a token when it attacks, you know, it's not bad. So I don't hate this. It's not quite like Adeline. Still don't know how to pronounce the card's name. It's a really good card. Still not Adeline, but it's about the next best thing. And that first line of text is something Adeline never had. So I do really like this card. And, you know, we've already seen on the 3 Minutes of Fairy a few years ago that, like, your opponent's not being able to do stuff on your turn is actually dirty and kind of not fun or fair magic in a lot of situations. So the card might actually be disgusting. 2 more mythics before we close this thing out. Let's take a look at Sarinth Greatwurm. This is 6 mana, 4 a red and a green for a 7/6 worm with trample. And whenever a land enters the battlefield, make a tapped Power Stone token, why don't you? So after you got 6 mana, you know what you need? More ramp. We all need more ramp, even though we have 6 mana. Honestly, a 6 mana, 7/6 trample, like, yeah, it's cool. I don't know why this is mythic, but probably because it says whenever a land enters the battlefield, you know, that's whenever you play a land and opponent plays a land. So I have to say commander again. Because, you drop this, and if your opponents don't kill it, you get like 3 or 4 Power Stone tokens by the time it comes back around to you, which seems fine. It could be worse. If you do have like 12 mana things to ramp into, this basically ramps you into those by the time it's your turn again. But, even in standard, if you play this, your opponent plays a land, then suddenly you're in business, and then you'll play a land on your turn, and sure, the Power Stone will be tapped. But still, the thing is leaving behind value, and your opponent kind of has to kill it, or they just get trampled to death. So, maybe, but 6 mana is kind of a lot for this. We're really not spending 6 mana for too much in Standard right now. And if we're going to be spending 6 mana, I think the card has to be astronomically good. Just one of the most pushed cards that we've seen is 6 mana in a long time. And what are the chances we're going to see that? Turns out the chances are extremely high. Let's take a look at Bladecoil Serpent to finish things up here. This is 6 mana and X for a 5/4 artifact creature. It's a serpent. And when it ETBs, for each double blue spent to cast it, you draw a card. But also, wait, that could be the whole card, but there's more. Whenever it enters the battlefield, for each double black spent to cast it, each opponent discards a card. Card keeps getting funnier. And also when it ETBs, for each double red spent to cast it, it also gets +1/+0 and gains trample and haste until end of turn. Big deal. It's not that good of a card, right? Card seems fine. Seems decent, I know too that there's some people out there arguing that 6 mana is too much. I was just thinking to myself, I was going to say earlier this season, but really the last couple of seasons, I keep telling myself, you got to stop making 4 mana cards like the #1 card in the set on every top 25 video. And then last set, I think we made Urtai #1. I'm not fairly certain. Am I tracking that correctly? So we still made a 4 mana card #1. And this time we might end up making a 6 mana card #1. I think this card is ludicrous. And I know that a lot of you agree. I shared this card on Twitter and all I said was, holy, it was all I had to say. And most of you who bothered commenting, it was kind of a lot of you, all agreed with that basic sentiment. The card just looks banana bread, dude. The card just looks tossed and flossed. Like, how the card exists? I've been talking a couple of times this season about Hydroid Krasis, and then I have to say, I don't think this is a very good comparison to Hydroid Krasis, whatever card I happen to be talking about at the time. I always say, this probably isn't the best comparison to Krasis, because Krasis, drew your cards and it caught you back up in the game. It was a refill and it gained you more life and stuff. This does the things that doesn't gain you life, but it catches you back up in terms of refilling your hand. And even if your opponent deals with it, they still have to deal with the other cards that you drew off of it, which was the real problem with Krasis. Is you dealt with the 5/5/6/6 Krasis. Now deal with the 2/3 cards I drew off of it. Silly card. In a mono blue deck, if you spend 6 mana on this, you draw 3 cards when it comes into play. It's so stupid. But, in Grixis, you can make them discard some cards. You can draw a card. You can make it have haste, and that's you crack in for a bunch. In a red deck, if you pay 6 mana for this, you are slamming in for 8 haste trample for 6 mana. I mean, I feel like that's actually a pretty good deal too. I liked Inferno with a star mounts, and this might not be better than Inferno, and Inferno didn't see any play. But I still think this is close. It doesn't have flying, but it does have the trample, and 8 power is a lot to deal with, especially at the top of your library, man. You play a sweeper, here's 8, just I'll kill you, I guess. Sure. 6 mana. Especially in this standard where everything's kind of mid-range oriented, games tend to grind some of the time. 6 mana, it's easy. It's nothing. It's fine. We can get to that. I don't care. Who cares? You mind twist the opponent. You draw 3. I mean, in blue-red, I mean, you spend 4 blue and 2 red on this. What do you draw 2 and crack in for 6 trample haste? Oh my god. And I haven't even talked about pumping more mana into it. You can use Power Stones to cast this. You can use Power Stones on X. That's been one of my big laments this season, is not being able to use Power Stone on X. But with now this and also Clay Champion, which is the card we've already seen. Is this a cycle? Be sick. But this and Clay Champion, you can use Power Stones for X, and I think that's going to matter. But geez, just when games grind, I have played so many games of Standard in the last year or two now, it feels like, where both players have 12 mana. It happens kind of with some frequency. So, off the top of your library in a situation like that, this is just, oh my goodness. I'll draw 4, swing 7, let's go. Oh, you have a card in your hand? Get rid of that too, chump. Oh, you know, like, God. The card just looks astronomically ridiculous. And so we're going to be playing with this, but so is everybody else, you know. Maybe it's bad. Maybe the people who are snidely adjusting their monocles and saying, like, excuse me, this is 6 mana, sir. Like, yeah, maybe you're right, but this time I doubt it. You weren't right about Hydroid Crisis, and I really doubt you're right about this one. I'm excited to play this one, and I think I've made that clear. It's got me talking fast. I'm so excited about it. At the beginning of the video, I came out here like, hey guys, what's up? I'm calm. I'm Dev from the place. And now I'm just mile a minute because this card's got me gushing, and I knew you would. I knew as soon as I got a chance to talk about you, I would just go off because, my lord, my Lanta, this card. So let me know what your favorite card of the day was as I reload Mythic Spoiler. Just go down there in the comments section and let me know how you felt about the takes today. Your favorite cards, my worst and best takes. No one tells me my best takes. You can tell me my worst takes, though. You're total freedom and liberty to do that down there in the comments section. And hey, while I'm doing this, why don't you also, on your way out, before you hit the lights, leave a like down there. Before you hit the likes. Before you hit the lights. Hit the likes. There, terrible. It would have been good wordplay if I didn't belabor it so much, right? But you can also sub to the channel if you haven't done that yet. You're going to want to be a subscriber when we hit Deck Tech season, top 10s, all that stuff. You want to see the top 10 sleepers, yada, yada. So make sure you hit subscribe before you leave, too. And there are no new cards. I have reloaded Mythic Spoiler. So that seems like a tidy little package. Just a couple of other things to tie up here. I'm going to be streaming on Twitch here soon. We're going to take out... we're going to finish up spoiler season basically on Twitch. I think I'll be there Thursday night, which is probably the same day a lot of you are watching this. But I'll be there Thursday night around 9 p.m. or so Eastern Standard Time. Check your clocks for that one. And we'll be talking about all the spoilers from Thursday. And then Friday, we'll do all the best cards from the common and uncommon dump. Over the weekend, we'll talk about the best of the rest. We might stream again. Lots of content coming up. Let's do all the things. Follow me over on Twitch. Sub if you want to over there. And you can check me out on Patreon if you want to help make the deck techs and top 10 lists and stuff better. I've been trying to do off the wall, like goofy, wacky stuff lately, and I hope you've been enjoying it. If you want to make me better at that, if you want to help with that, go on over to the Patreon, link in the description. Any support is very, very appreciated. But aside from that, I'm done. I've been talking too long anyway. Just let me know how you feel about it. It's your turn. But I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.